The Dark Signers, a group of evil that terrorized Neo Domino City and almost brought forth the end of the world. If you ever saw the glowing Nazca lines piercing the sky, it was probably too late for you. The piercing lines represented the godless earthbound immortals. These massive monstrosities were sealed within the Nazca lines by the Crimson Dragon 5,000 years prior to the beginning of 5Ds. Thanks to the Zero Reverse disaster which also killed Yusei's father, these evil beings were unleashed once again. These demons were summoned to the field by sacrificing the souls of captured innocent citizens that were being held hostage within the lines. And even though the group that brought forth these monsters were the Dark Signers, the main group of villains associated with this arc, they were nothing more than vengeful puppets. Each Dark Signer was fixated on some sort of revenge, and that's who the Earthbound Immortals preyed on. And there truly is one word that synonymously fits almost all of the Dark Signers: tragedy. By giving a human being another chance to live, these Earthbound Immortals were able to grant new life to a human at the cost of basically sacrificing their soul to be the Earthbound God's slave. But that's a small price to pay for a new chance at life, right? Before we break down the Dark Signers as a group individually, it's important to know how the group was even able to form in the first place. As previously mentioned, these Earthbound demons were defeated by the original Signers 5,000 years ago, so how did they manage to return? Well, for the answer to that, we have to look at one of the most destructive events in the history of the Yugioh timeline: Zero Reverse. Zero Reverse was a horrific disaster that ended up wiping out the original Domino City and split Neo Domino City in half. The main thing that you need to know about this event is that Dr. Fudo and his two assistants, the Godwin brothers, Roman and Rex, were the main three that worked on the Ener-D. Ener-D, or momentum in the sub, creates a limitless supply of power to Neo Domino City, which allowed people to turbo duel and all that fun stuff. However, 20 years prior, there was the original Ener-D, which was much more unstable and incomplete than the current one. Dr. Fudo, Yusei's father, was actually aware that the continuation of this reactor development would eventually lead to a horrific disaster. However, Roman Godwin became obsessed with this machine and thus became the head developer, and that is where the story of the Dark Signers begins, with Roman Godwin. Roman Godwin was actually born as a Signer and wielded the Crimson Dragon Head birthmark. Roman became obsessed with researching Nazca lines and eventually crossed paths with a mysterious man associated with Iliaster who told him to stare deep into the light of the Ener-D. Upon returning to Domino City, Roman stared into the light of the Ener-D like he was told, and what he saw was quite shocking. He saw the battle between the Crimson Dragon and the Earthbound Immortals, and then the darkness was born. A spider mark appeared on Roman's arm, and from that point on, he was the immediate battleground between Signer and Dark Signer. Eventually, Roman succumbed to the darkness and tore off his entire left arm, the arm that possessed the mark of the Crimson Dragon Head. This was removed in the English dub. Roman then yelled at his brother Rex to find the 5 Signers and to defeat him. As if in one last desperate moment, Roman knew deep down that what he was doing was wrong, and that he was aware he had completely lost himself to the darkness. In order to become a Dark Signer, he had to kill himself, which is what led him to overload the Ener-D reactor, leading to his death, the death of probably thousands if not millions of innocent people, and ultimately, Zero Reverse. This moment revived Uru, the Spider Earthbound Immortal, and thus, the Earthbound Immortals were back. Although we do not know the exact time period for when the rest of the Dark Signers joined the group, we can create kind of a decent timeline. The most well-known Dark Signer is Yugioh, or Kalin in the dub. Yugioh was tasked with easily the hardest job of all the Dark Signers, to defeat Yusei Fudo. The main character of 5Ds was the fixation of Yugioh's hatred, and really the reason he was able to become reborn. Yusei, Yugioh, Jack, and Crow all used to be the best of friends. They went around cleaning up Satellite by defeating duel gangs. They had cleaned up almost all of Satellite, but unfortunately, Yugioh wanted more. He began to target sector security and the police of Satellite, much to the dismay of the other members. One night, Yugioh went completely off the deep end and actually stabbed a security officer. The terrifying shot we see is Yugioh smiling with blood on his face, hovering over a security officer whom was bleeding out. Yusei tackled Yugioh and wrestled him to the ground as security showed up, which led Yugioh to believe that Yusei was in cahoots with security and sold him out. Yugioh was taken to jail, where he was beaten and starved for what he did to a cop, and eventually only had a few minutes of life left. That is when he was approached by a voice, a dark spirit if you will. This voice said to him that if he died, he would be reborn as a Dark Signer and could carry out his vengeful wishes on whoever he holds accountable for his situation. Kiryu willingly accepts this proposition and dies of starvation moments later. He ends up wielding the Mark of the Giant, Earthbound God Kakapakapu, and he is reborn as our second Dark Signer. Up next, we have Misty Lola. Misty was a beloved fashion model, celebrity, and generally happy person. She really is the antithesis of who you would expect a Dark Signer to be. But as I mentioned earlier, tragedy is the one word that can accurately describe all of the Dark Signers, and unfortunately, no one is immune to tragedy. Misty had a great love for her younger brother, a boy named Toby. Toby came to her one day and told her that he wanted to join the Arcadia movement. Even though this video is focused on the Dark Signers, Arcadia was another antagonist group that was pretty prevalent during this entire arc. Misty was wary about Toby going to visit Arcadia, but Toby, being the young, optimistic, kind of dumb kid that he was, decided to go. It was at the Arcadia facility that one of the darkest moments in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Happened. Toby, a 12-year-old boy, was purposefully electrocuted to death by one of Divine's experiments, as he was unable to hand the testing, and Divine deemed him worthless because of it. Misty ended up finding her beloved brother's body dumped in the Daemon area. Misty's entire world was shattered. It was at this point that Misty immediately scapegoated Aki, the Black Rose Witch, as the murderer, seeing how she was a member of Arcadia that Toby mentioned before going on his eventual final journey. Unfortunately, more tragedy for Misty was right around the corner. She couldn't focus as she was driving, as the only person she loved and cared about was no longer with her. She ended up losing control of her vehicle and drove it into the ocean. Misty was rushed to the hospital and was diagnosed as being in a coma. On the verge of death, Earthbound God Kokorayua came to her and offered her a chance of new life. She took it and was instructed to kill the Crimson Dragon's servant, the Black Rose Witch. And thus, our third Dark Signer was born. Up next in this story, we have Devack. Devack is the only Dark Signer which we really do not know all that much about. We have no idea what sort of prior life he had, we have no idea how he died, and thus, we have no idea why he was reborn as a Dark Signer. In a way, the ambiguousness that comes with Devack is kind of cool. I always thought he was the creepiest Dark Signer, and maybe that is because they never explored his past. As a kid, I always imagined he was a sadistic person in his past life, and when he heard about the opportunity to become a Dark Signer, he jumped at it. He clearly had some connection with the spirit world as well. Devack wields Earthbound God Cthulhu, the Mark of the Monkey, and is our fourth Dark Signer in this story. Even after Kiryu's near-official win against Yusei, the Dark Signers knew they needed a fifth Dark Signer to combat the five Signers, and it was at this time that Misty's role in the team was very important. Misty attended a celebrity party, and this is where she met reporter Carly Carmine for the first time. She stared deep into Carly's face and predicted that she would face death in her near future, a premonition that you never want to hear anyone say about you. Well, it turns out Misty's prediction was right. Carly gets thrown out of the massive Arcadia headquarters building by Divine and falls to her death. We see her lifeless eyes as a dark god comes to visit her and grants her another chance at life. The sweet, innocent Carly is then reborn as a wicked Dark Signer. She wields Earthbound God Asclepisu, the Mark of the Hummingbird. Carly gets her revenge on the man who killed her, Divine, as she ends up defeating him in a duel. It's as if the initial adrenaline rush ended right after Divine's defeat, because we then see a scared and hysterical Carly slowly starting to realize that she has become the one thing she never wanted to be, a Dark Signer. Misty embraces her, and the two head back to the Dark Signers HQ, as the five Dark Signers are now set up for their final showdown against the Signers. The matchups were as followed: Kiryu versus Yusei, which was a rematch after Kiryu nearly won the first duel, Devack versus Ruka, Carly versus Jack, and Misty versus Aki, which was a rematch after their duel at Arcadia got cut short. The Dark Signers were tasked with preventing the Signers from defeating them and activating the 4 control towers. Roman stated that if the 4 control towers were not activated by sunset, the door to the Netherworld would open, and the ultimate Earthbound God would descend on the world. Devack lost to Ruka, as did Kiryu to Yusei, and 2 of the Dark Signers were defeated for good. After Devack lost to Ruka, Greiger became the 5th Signer. Greiger was killed by hanging via Roman so that he could be a Dark Signer, but he just ended up losing to Crow. I always forget technically Greiger was a Dark Signer, mainly because he was not a member of the original 5. Yusei then took on Roman right above the original NRD reactor, a fitting location. Yusei ends up defeating Roman, and thus, the only Darksigners remaining were Carly and Misty. Carly faced off against Jack, and used the last of her willpower to actually grant Jack the win, even though he made up his mind to end it in a draw so that both of them would lose together. Carly was defeated and vanished, and the third control tower was activated. All that was left was Misty. Misty actually gave the Darksigners the win. Thanks to her tricking Aki in the Hall of Mirrors and stalling for time, she was able to open the door to the Netherworld. Even though she was defeated by Aki and made peace with her after learning the truth about Toby, it was too late. The fourth control tower was not activated by sunset, and the King of the Netherworld had arisen. The Signers' true battle had just begun, as Rex Godwin revealed himself to be the fifth and final Signer, as well as the final Dark Signer, wielding both marks on his body much like his brother did decades before. Godwin intended to lay waste to the world using the King of the Netherworld's power, and all that was standing in his way was Jack, Crow, and Yusei. Godwin fought well, as the ultimate Earthbound God was slowly but surely making its way to the battlefield, but Yusei and friends pulled out the win. Rex wielded Earthbound God Wiracocha Raska, the mark of the Condor. Once his god was destroyed, he also hit 0 life points. The Godwin brothers, that had been the cause of so much destruction and death, thanked Yusei after their defeat, and decided to remain in the afterlife, thus marking the end of the Darksigners and, more importantly, the Earthbound God's attempt to destroy the world. A really cool aspect of the Darksigners is the Nazca lines that are formed from their duels. They actually all resemble real Nazca lines made a very, very long time ago on Earth. The Nazca people in Peru used to actually make massive outlines of these creatures, and looking at them in comparison with the anime's take on it is actually pretty incredible. It's amazing to think that real humans made such incredible art in nature like this, and I think it's really cool that this was a massive inspiration for the Earthbound Gods and this 5D's arc in general. The fates of the Darksigners after their revival are interesting. Devack, in fashion with his character, is left completely ambiguous. I don't believe he is ever seen or even mentioned again for the rest of the show. Misty's fate is also a bit disappointing. She sends a postcard to Aki, and we see her cheering for Yusei in his final duel against Zone, but that's it. Carly also goes back to being a fangirl in love with Jack, who does not remember any of the events of her time as a Darksigner, and interestingly enough, Yugioh actually remembers everything. He has a great arc called Satisfaction Town a little later on in Season 3, where he is basically a lifeless version of himself, just trying to lose a duel so that he can be sent to the mines to die. Yeah, it's a pretty intense arc. I always assumed Yugioh could remember all of the events because he willingly became a Darksigner while he was still alive, whereas Carly was dead and then became one. Greiger, who also was revived, could remember all of the events, and that is also because he probably willingly chose to join the Darksigners before death. That was never really explained on, but it's always been my assumption on the matter. And that about wraps it up. Thank you guys so much for listening to my video, for watching my video, the history of the Darksigners, one of my favorite arcs in all of Yu-Gi-Oh!, one of my favorite antagonist groups in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! If you have not checked out 5Ds, be sure to check it out. This arc takes place in really Season 2. It ends within the first 64 episodes. It is a really, really enjoyable arc. Big thank you to my Egyptian God Tier patron, Matthew Kennedy, for suggesting this video idea. As an Egyptian God Tier patron, you get to suggest one video for me per month, so big thank you to him for suggesting this video. And a big thanks to all of you for watching it. I hope it was enjoyable. I hope you learned a little bit. And let me know who your favorite Darksigner is and why. I'm actually really interested to hear that from you guys down below. My favorite Darksigner, probably Yugioh, and my favorite Earthbound Immortal is probably Earthbound God Raska, Rex Godwin's Earthbound God. So yeah, let me know what your favorite Earthbound Immortal is as well down below. A special thank you to my Platinum Tier patrons, Alexa Baker, Glen McGookin, Jorge Carrillo, James Rose, Samuel Stark, Thomas Adderley, Horace Maye, Goosey Q, Vincent Van Der Veen, Jordan Osceola, Smith620, Galladiator, FrostReaper, Jorge Leon, and Blue Maiden 28, and to my Diamond Tier patrons, Jesse Wood, Melinda Phantom, and Ben Hartz, and to my Egyptian God Tier patrons, Syn Cloud, and Joss Rivers. Thank you to everyone who supports me on Patreon, who is a channel member, and just who watches these videos, because without you guys, I would not be able to do this. I will talk to you all down below. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you have an amazing day.
信じられるのなら君が育てた種はいつ